I first became interested in Carmelite spirituality because of the lives of the Carmelite saints. In particular, Saint Therese of Lisieux. I've had a devotion to her since I was a little girl, and I was always impressed by the way that even when she was really young, she was completely devoted to God. And she was so normal. I thought if there was hope for her to be a saint, there was also hope for me. I also really wanted to be part of a community that would support me in my growing closer to God instead of trying to do it all on my own. And being part of the secular order of Discalced Carmelites meant I was a member of the larger Carmelite family. That way I would not only have other members who were striving for the same thing that I was, but also I would share in the graces of the order, in the prayers of the order, so that all of these things could be supporting me in my spiritual walk.
The course that first got me really interested in philosophy as an undergraduate was ethics. I was initially a computer science major, but had to take a couple of philosophy courses for my general requirements. So I was in this ethics course, and the subject of the course was Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. And I got really intrigued by that course because the central question was, what makes us happy as human beings? And we discovered with Aristotle that happiness consisted in a life of reason through virtue, where the virtues were these moral habits that incline us to the good and indeed make us good. So I found that answer really compelling, and what I appreciated, among other things, was that it excluded certain kinds of human goods that also kind of hold out the promise of perfection, but in the end don't deliver. Things like pleasure and power and wealth and fame, things like that.
When I first joined the secular order of Discalced Carmelites in my first year of formation, we were reading a quote from St. Alphonsus Liguori, where he paraphrases something that St. Teresa of Avila wrote, and it really struck me. He said, "He who does not practice mental prayer needs no devil to carry his soul to hell, for he takes himself there." Oh my goodness, that really struck me. I had been trying to establish a prayer life for a long time, with some success, but there were still most weeks 1 or 2 days where I missed my prayer for whatever reason. And after hearing that quote, it really brought home to me how important and necessary mental prayer was for my spiritual life. And I decided to make that my number one priority in my relationship with God. I rededicated myself to prayer, and my spiritual life was really transformed. Some years later, however, I did get stuck, even though I was still praying. And at that point, it was another Carmelite saint, Therese of Lisieux, who taught me that I wasn't surrendering to God in my life in different areas. I was holding on to things because I didn't fully trust Him. When I learned to trust God and entrust myself to Him in a deeper way, then again, there was a growth spurt spiritually. Now I am looking more at the writing of St. John of the Cross, and I'm hoping that that also will prove transformative.
Philosophy can be incredibly powerful because it reveals truths for us, truths about the human person, truths about the world that we live in, even some truths about God. How does it do this? Well, philosophy reasons, it reflects on truths that are derived from the senses instead of, say, those that are revealed by God. So it can be very effective in engaging with people, say, of other faiths or people with no faith at all, so that we can discover together, for example, that in the moral life, happiness consists in a life of virtue. If we're already inclined to the good, then what philosophy can do is kind of chart out a way to the good life. But what happens if we're not always inclined to the good? What happens if we're inclined in the other direction? If we sin, if we have real problems attaining our good? Well, there, unfortunately, philosophy can't help us too much. It kind of comes up with a blank. And the only real solution on a practical level that we can appeal to is the grace and the salvation that comes from Jesus Christ and His church.
Through the various things that I have written, my blog, my books, my Facebook page, Authentic Contemplative Prayer, and my spirituality columns, I've been able to introduce a lot of lay people to Carmelite spirituality and to the life of prayer. One person in particular that it really humbles me to even mention as having an influence on his life was my younger brother, who I invited to Carmelite meetings with me. And he did go with me for a time, but discerned that he was not called to be a secular Carmelite. However, a short time later, he entered a Carmelite monastery. He went on to be the co-founder of the Carmelite Monks of Wyoming, and you might know him now as Father Michael Mary, the founder of Mystic Monk Coffee. I talk with him a few times a year, and things have now come full circle in that he is a spiritual advisor for me. I tell him about my spiritual life, struggles that I'm having. He gives me sound spiritual advice for my own life and also for my apostolate.
When I graduated from my undergraduate studies, my idea was not that I was going to work for the church. It was more that I was going to get an advanced degree in philosophy and maybe teach. So I was in graduate school at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. when I met Connie. And we fell in love very quickly, got married, started a family, and this was all within the space of a couple of years. So very quickly, I reached a point where it was a lot more important for me to support the family than to finish out my degree. I already had my master's degree, but was still working on the PhD. So I looked around and I tried to find a good, solid, high-paying job in philosophy. But when that failed, I decided to fall back on a few other things that I had done and had experience in. I had some experience as a newspaper reporter, and in graduate school, I had also been the editor and the general manager of an academic journal in philosophy. So when the job of editor and general manager of the Catholic Times of the Diocese of La Crosse, Wisconsin opened up, I thought, gee, that was really a close fit. It really matched the qualifications that I had. So I applied and I got the job, and that was my first full-time job in the church.
When we moved to La Crosse, Wisconsin, Dan became the editor and general manager of the Catholic Times, which was the diocesan newspaper. He was looking for some new columnists, and I had been writing ever since I could read, really, and I love to write. And with that and my background in Carmelite spirituality, Dan asked if I'd be interested in writing a spirituality column. I did that partly to help him out and also to share what I had learned about prayer. I continued for a couple of years writing for the Catholic Times, then took some time off because our children were small and needed more attention. When we moved back to Minnesota in 2009 and were in a new diocese, I restarted the column there. And I've been writing about an article a month or more ever since.
When I first started working for the Catholic Times in La Crosse, I really loved that job. I was very confident that that was where the Lord wanted me to be at that time. We were sharing the good news about the local church. We were providing instruction for people who wanted to deepen their knowledge of the faith. We were inspiring people to take that next step in their faith journey. And all the content that we were developing for the newspaper was really oriented in those three areas. So it was a very satisfying experience, very gratifying, and even very humbling that we were called to engage in such a project.
I started blogging in 2012 as a way to share my homeschooling method with other Catholic parents. I called the blog Contemplative Homeschool because I really wanted to run our home and our school in such a way that would prepare my kids for a deep relationship with God, in particular, to live a contemplative life, one conducive to prayer. What I realized after just a short time of blogging was that other parents were not necessarily established in prayer themselves, and so it wasn't something they could easily pass on to their kids. They needed some formation themselves first. So my focus changed from helping them to teach their children to teaching them themselves how to grow in prayer and about Carmelite spirituality.
I have to say that for a long time, I was not a big fan of video. I thought it wasn't a particularly thoughtful or reflective medium. In other words, it was just harder to learn from it because you were not inclined to think about what you experienced or ponder it after you were watching that video or as you were watching it. So my opinion changed a little bit when I got my second job for a diocese, which was at the Diocese of New Ulm, Minnesota. I was communication director there, and the department had a slightly different approach to the way it engaged in communications. They had a variety of options that they always wanted at their disposal to reach a wider audience. So their resources were not quite as concentrated in print, and therefore I got the opportunity to do some video for them. Did a couple of videos for the youth ministry department, did a diocesan annual appeal video, and these all went very well. At the same time, I was doing some research on the internet and discovered that the internet was very quickly being taken over by video because that's what people wanted to consume. That's what people wanted to experience online.
My second love after writing is teaching. I have a degree in elementary education, and I've been teaching in some form to students of all ages ever since graduating from college. I also teach my own children, as I mentioned earlier. So it was kind of a no-brainer for me to present material about prayer, not only in books, but also in some kind of a course. Originally, I was thinking of holding retreats and conferences, and I've done a little bit of that, but because our children are still young and some other issues, it wasn't practical for me to go traveling all over the country to spread Carmelite spirituality. So the idea of holding an online course where I could serve people all over the world became really attractive to me. I also think that video has an immediacy that the written word does not. And our culture is very visual, so we can reach a wider audience, perhaps a younger audience, than we could just with books. And that also led me to want to do more courses.
Video can be a very powerful medium. It unites sights and sounds in a way that audiences find very compelling. It really moves the emotions. And yet, as we know, it can also be rather superficial. People tend to come away from a video experience with kind of a sense of something, or maybe a strong emotion. But it's not first and foremost, or so it would seem, for learning a set of truths. So If we're going to make video the foundation of an online course, in order for people to get the most out of it, we have to do more than just video. We've got to supplement with some other things, some other helps and supports in order to make that experience as successful as it can be. And we've worked really hard to do that.
I offered my first online video course for Lent of 2020, and at the time I thought, if I can get at least 50 students to sign up, then the work for the course would be worth my while, and I would consider doing further courses. Well, we had almost 200 people sign up for that first course, and then I ran it again in June, and another 100 people signed up. So it was successful, far beyond what my hopes were. We also had a number of people asking me, when are you going to offer another course? Are you going to offer any courses on prayer? And the feedback for the course was almost completely positive. Everyone who wrote a review for the course gave it 5 stars. So we really felt that this was the direction that God wanted us to go.
So the detachment course was a lot of work, but it was also very satisfying. It was more successful than we thought it was going to be. So we realized that there was a genuine need that people had to learn more about prayer so that they could grow in their spiritual lives. The next course that we're planning on doing is a fundamentals course, really. We're going to go all the way back sort of to the beginning and talk about the fundamentals of prayer. So this course is entitled How to Grow in Prayer. And then after we do that, we're hoping to do some other things. The next course that we'll probably do will be one on mental prayer. And for this next series going forward, we're going to try to change things up just a little bit to make the presentation even more engaging than it was before. So I'm going to be on camera. We're going to adopt kind of an interview style where I will be asking Connie the questions and kind of guiding a little bit the conversation. And we hope that our audience really enjoys that. So that's going to mean something new for me, actually, because I'm not used to being in front of the camera. I'm more of a behind-the-scenes guy. I've always been with my different roles in Catholic media up to this point. And then our kids will be involved even more behind the camera, operating the camera and making sure that we have a good production. So it's going to be a challenge for everybody, but I hope it will be at least as rewarding.
There's a hidden gem in the teaching of the Second Vatican Council that really hasn't had an impact as it should have yet on the Church, and that is the universal call to holiness. I see all of our work as spreading this teaching. We want to help a multitude of lay people come into a closer relationship with God, in particular through growing in prayer. I think that as lay people ourselves, we're uniquely positioned to teach other lay people what it takes to grow in prayer. We understand the challenges of the lay vocation, raising a family, working, and that sort of thing, and can put it into very practical, concrete, and realistic terms on the steps that we need to take in order to grow closer to God. So we hope to have a whole series of courses on prayer and other aspects of the spiritual life that will raise up a whole multitude of lay men and women who love the Lord with all their heart.